I'm Jacqueline Garrick. I'm the founder of Whistleblowers of America, and I'm very honored to be here today with this panel of distinguished whistleblowers to talk about life after whistleblowing. We are very grateful for the National Whistleblower Center for giving us this opportunity today to share our thoughts and experiences so that others may learn and grow from the things that we've been through. So as the founder of Whistleblowers of America, I just wanted to start by saying what we do is a peer support network. We use a trauma-informed perspective, and we work together to help build a more resilient whistleblower who can get through some of the struggles of being a whistleblower that we will focus on a little bit more today. We have also started our own workplace promise organizations interested in right doing and practices in right doing, as well as to train whistleblower protection advocates so that they can become certified. And I'll ask Christian to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. And then Martina and I have worked together on a book on the psychosocial impacts of whistleblowing and how that has shattered employee resilience and breaks the workplace promise. So we'll get into some more of those issues and more of the issues that Ted and Aaron have done through their advocacy work. So before I go any further, I want to take a moment and ask each of the whistleblowers to give their like a 2-minute introduction of who they are and a little bit about their cases. And then I've got about 30 minutes of question and answer that we'll run through. So Christian, why don't you say hello?
Hi, my name is Christian Green. I am a whistleblower. I think often in our journey, we don't identify that as that immediately. So it's taken a while to kind of comprehend. But I used to be the ombudsman for child welfare in the District of Columbia, and it was my duty to ensure that the agency itself was adhering to the rights and responsibilities of children in foster care. And I had the duty of investigating and finding individual or systemic issues of violation of law, policy, and procedure. Given my work and the Trin report, which was to be published through DC City Council and to the public, I, as the ombudsman, was inappropriately placed under the director, who then, her and her staff, whitewashed the Trin report so that there wasn't information in the public about children's rights in foster care being violated. I was terminated without cause, and at that moment I had a decision on how to proceed. So I decided to file a whistleblower complaint and really honestly focus on legislative change. And so for the last 4 years, I've been working towards legislative change. And as of February 2021, a bill was passed despite mayoral veto, which established an ombudsperson for children in the district, which is massive. We just had budget hearings, and hopefully it will be fully funded, so it will become functional this fall and will protect children in the district in foster care or have contact with the agency, and hopefully grow to encompass children with mental health, educational concerns, and just holistically as a city of the District of Columbia. I met Jackie along my way, and she's been a huge mentor of mine, and I've really loved her insight on the psychological impacts of whistleblowing on people's personal and professional lives. And so that's what brings me here today, is my work with Jackie and my excitement over what I think is kind of a revolutionary look at whistleblowers and how to help them feel safe and identify risks along their journey so that they can make institutional and individual changes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So Ted, why don't I ask you to introduce yourself as well as the other social worker on the panel?
Okay, I'm Ted Blickwedel. I'm a retired Marine and combat veteran. I worked at the VA in the Vet Center program for about 9 years, up to about 3.5 years ago, and took early retirement because of excessive productivity metrics. They had forced on counselors, which was burning them out, all kinds of things happening, people taking FMLA leave and going on anxiety medication, seeking out their own therapists. And, to a point, it was impacting our ability to provide quality care to veterans. And as this was addressed through the chain of command, nothing was being done at all, just the usual lip service, trying to justify why the numbers had to be without really explaining how that was being calculated at the same time. So finally, I had contacted the chief RSC officer in Washington that ran the Vet Center program and addressed these issues, and he didn't respond. So after about a week, I readdressed it again, but this time I had copied everybody in the program, all the counselors in the system throughout the country, and did get a response. But unfortunately, 36 hours after I had done that, my computer had been cut off, but up to that point, I'd gotten responses from about 60 counselors in 25 different states and 42 different vet centers that were validating all my allegations. And so at that point, I went on terminal leave, took early retirement, and the retaliation just kept increasing as I'm filing reports with federal agencies on grievances and complaints about this whole thing, and eventually ended up in Senator Reid's office with his staff and evidence I had accumulated. And I'd also done the same with Congressman Cicilline's staff. And this led to Senator Tester and Senator Reid, my senator from Rhode Island, requesting a GAO investigation, which was done over a year, and last September released a report with recommendations validating my allegations. And all of this has culminated into congressional legislation on both the House and Senate side that I was allowed to even have input on through my congressional delegates in Rhode Island, entitled the Vet Center Improvement Act of 2021. And it currently has been introduced to both committees in the House and Senate for consideration. That was just the weekend before Memorial Day, as a matter of fact. And there's still some tweaks I'm working on with Congressman Cicilline and Senator Reid's staff on the legislation to ensure that it's going to be airtight, allowing, as the legislation itself is saying, it's directing the VA secretary to report to Congress every year on the impact of the productivity metrics and its impact on quality care and counselor welfare with GAO oversight. And they're even being directed to establish an internal working group inside the Vet Center program to monitor this, all of which is based on anonymous counselor feedback in an electronic database that cannot be altered by any party. And so this is something that, once it is passed, actually won't be happening for about a year, to give the VA time to get their ducks lined up to be in compliance with the legislation. So that's where it's at. And along the way, I realized lessons I learned in order, for this kind of advocacy work to be successful. And just briefly, for the sake of time, just.
Well, I was going to say, because those, you're getting into some of the Q&A stuff
for later on. Okay, sure. Okay.
So let's let Martina introduce herself, and then Erin, and then we'll go back and we'll get into the Q&A. So Martina, Dr. Buck, how are you?
Hi, I'm Martina. And I guess I'm in the minority that I'm not a social worker. I'm a molecular biologist. But whistleblowing retaliation happens to all of us.
Yeah.
We don't have a stereotype going on here. And first, I'd like to say, Ted, thank you for your service. We really all value it, even though we don't say it often enough.
Thank you.
So I was a whistleblower at a VA here in San Diego. And a lot of people were shocked by that because they thought that, I guess, San Diego was one of the best VAs, so it couldn't happen. Well, it can happen anywhere. It can happen at good institutions, at bad institutions, everything. So mine was that since I'm a researcher, I was on several committees to evaluate the safety to the employees of research protocols, both human and animal, and to evaluate overall the science of them and the safety. While you're evaluating them for one thing, unfortunately, leadership really wants you to look sort of to the exclusion of everything else. So if you're not on the human research committee, you're not supposed to evaluate the parameters of human research. But if something is glaring and obvious, there's the see something, say something in the federal government now. So what was happening here is that this group of PIs were violating the ethics and the policies that are already well established to conduct human research. They weren't consenting properly. They were doing procedures that they were calling standard of care that were not standard of care. And they were basically doing this research on a protected population, which is decompensated cirrhotic alcoholic patients that were veterans. And while the funding was not directly VA, it was through the affiliate academic institution. It was being facilitated at the VA. And I had my allegations in 2013 internally, and nothing happened. And so then I took them to the OSC, and now they're still being adjudicated in various federal agencies, including the funding agencies. And so this was 2013 that this started, and it's still going on. And I was terminated officially at the VA for making multiple false allegations, which now, according to Congress, all the allegations were substantiated, and I'm still terminated. So apparently my allegations were making it so one of the people in research leadership could not do his job. I made the mistake of telling him this was his job. He was responsible for this policies and for upholding all of these protocols, and he wasn't doing it.
Right.
So we'll see what happens. It took a while for me to move on and get and work. As we all know, that's one of the problems in whistleblowers. But I have, and Jackie and her institution were incredibly helpful, hooking us up and doing some counseling, some peer just chatting back and forth. It's so helpful. So thank you.
Well, thank you. So, and Aaron and I have met recently, and so I'm going to let him take a minute and introduce himself and briefly tell his story as well.
I guess briefly would be the key here. I'm Aaron Westrick, and I'm a whistleblower. I like the way that was started out earlier. I'll make this brief, but our conversation today, I think, with Jacqueline, that we were talking about this and the stresses and so forth, and it's because my situation runs through my whole adult life. So in 1982, soon after becoming a police officer in 1981, late 81, in 82, I was involved in a shooting, and I was wearing body armor. I was approaching a felony suspect, who wasn't overly impressed, and he shot me through my left hand, and the bullet struck me underneath my badge and lodged in my body armor. And we were at 5 feet, 57 magnums. I fired back, and he wasn't wearing body armor, but he was crippled, and he went to prison. I continued. I had a bachelor's degree then. I continued with my education, and I got kind of thinking about and studying violence. And I went to Detroit area, and I went to Wayne State University for my master's and my doctorate degree. And I also tied in a lot with studying body armor and the effects, the physiological and social effects of being struck on body armor. I also worked on dissertation committees in biomechanics, even though my PhD is technically in sociology. I'd said that for Martina. That's really kind of confusing. But being a big three, when it comes to biomechanics, because of seat belts and car designs and so forth, we're pretty big in this area, in Detroit area. I continued in police work. Took me, after my master's degree, it took me 9 years because I'm married. I have 3 children, or we have 3 children. Didn't have them alone, and raised the kids. Actually transferred to another sheriff's department to be closer to Wayne State. I got my doctorate degree, and at that point, just before I got it, I was asked by the nation's largest body armor company to become their director of research, and that means I moved to Northern Michigan, where I'm sitting now. We moved to Northern Michigan. Kids are little. They're all grown up. Our son's been a police officer 15 years already in Grand Rapids, Michigan, as an example. But came to Northern Michigan, first 9 years at Second Chance Body Armor, went relatively well. But then I found that our new product that was being pretty much funded by the Bulletproof Vest Partnership Act, and also there was some funds coming from obviously from the federal government to the military. I found that the body armor system that was making 70% of the profits was defective. Third, because I'm the director of research, that's what I'm supposed to do too. I don't think they thought I would figure it out, but I did. And I found the problem in 2001. I started sending in July of 2001, started sending internal memos. In September 18th, 2001, actually, and it said that some of our customers, soldiers, police are going to be killed if we don't do something about this. I was ignored. I was uninvited to all the important meetings with the main provider of the product of the Tioba, one of the biggest companies in the world. I think they made $363 billion last year, as an example. And I became the bad guy. And it was 2004. So 2001, about 2004, placed a complaint with the government after calling Senator Leahy's office and Nighthorse Campbell, who wrote legislation, and I was told I need an attorney. And I said, my first response was, I don't need an attorney because I didn't do anything wrong. I'm the good guy here. They said, and it was said, I need an attorney. So I had to find an attorney. I found Stephen Cohen, National Whistleblower Center. He looked at the case and he said, let's do this. In the meantime, and soon after, a police officer was killed in the line of duty, defective body armor, another one crippled. There's military, but we can't document because military, a lot of times you can't tell what you can tell the cause of death. Is it a body armor failure or such great threats in that neck of the woods, they'd say. But things kind of went that way in 2004. Since 2001, 2004, in October, I was the first when the company started to go bankrupt because this was getting out that they were going public and that this public offering was going to be what I thought it would be. I was actually terminated, although they say I was just the first one to be laid off. So you know how it goes. So I ended up going to work at a university, Lake Superior State University, where I work till this day. I still maintain my police certification. I was telling Jacqueline, I was actually policing last night, and tomorrow night I'll be policing again. It's the one thing that kind of runs through my life. So the shooting, I was married 2 months to my wife now, her name is Kim, and 2 months after I was involved in the shooting, and we got talking about this today, it's actually, this thing is a big deal to my family, but very, very stressful because it runs through everything. You look at what I do with being a college professor, I teach crisis intervention, I teach investigations, I teach ethics, imagine that. And it kind of runs through everything. I'm constantly reminded of my whistleblowing, and I guess we'll read the rest for the questions.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I should, and I feel like we should be at an AA meeting. Hi, I'm Jackie. I'm a whistleblower. I was at the Pentagon, and I was the director of the Defense Suicide Prevention Office when I felt like there was a conflict of interest over some of the contracts. I made my disclosures, and I eventually got removed from my job. And in that process, and I'm also an Army veteran. I was an Army social work officer. I've spent most of my career around combat trauma, PTSD, and suicide. I began to see, hear, and feel a lot of the same things as a whistleblower that we've talked about with combat veterans, which is what led me to think that some of the same strategies we've used for combat vets would work for whistleblowers. And the evidence-based behind peer support is something that I felt like would apply to what we're doing with Whistleblowers of America. And one of the things Christian and I work on quite a bit is the idea that this does take peer to peer, and I think some of you have mentioned that a little bit today. So Christian, um, tell us a little bit more about your experience with this idea that a trauma-informed peer support approach and getting people certified has been helpful.
Okay. I am in full support of kind of the peer support, the mentorship. I think the reason being, I'm a social worker who's worked in very crisis oriented agencies, so child protective services, things of that nature. And when you start to look at the person themselves, uh, in my industry, secondary trauma is something that's commonly known and experienced just due to the work. And so when you take that concept and you apply it to workers, just in general, and trying to do the right thing, trying to do what they're paid for, trying to embody their job description and adhere to their code of ethics. So for social workers, we have the NASW code of ethics. And it's important to recognize that there can be a distinction between moral obligation, legal obligation, and your ethical obligation, and identifying where those break.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very lonely process. It can be extremely lonely because it's very rare in the grand scheme of things that whistleblowers really understand that they're whistleblowers and are really able to take a very firm step and know that there's retaliation. I think there's a lot of whistleblowers who are unrecognized at this point. But knowing that your experience is similar to someone else is very powerful. And having
Mm-hmm.
the validation that you have safety concerns, because that can be a real concern, and that there's long term risks. I think coming from the social work background, when I made the decision to whistleblow in the format that I did, I had enough insight and self-awareness to know that I had to grieve the loss of my career. I knew it would end my career in this very small town called DC. Um, and so I was able to take preventative steps, but at the same point in time, being punched is still being punched. It's painful. So when you're able to reach out to someone who has a similar experience or can give you guidance on um, what to expect, how to safety plan, knowing that these feelings are normal is huge. And I ran into Jackie after about a year of after termination. I was ready to file my whistleblower complaint pro se because the feedback I got from lawyers was like, this is excellent case, but it's just too big. It's going to take too much time. And so no one would say, oh, this isn't worth it. And that was very confusing to me that someone recognized the value of what I was doing, but wouldn't represent me. And so finding Jackie helped me digest this new information. I often say to Jackie, it's like whistleblowers tend to be experts in their own field. And when you get thrown into this legal world, it's like you have no expertise, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like speaking it's English and going to a Spanish country and not knowing any Spanish, so you feel very disengaged. And so to have guidance through that process, even though they might not have the exact same situation as you, the fact that other people feel very driven by, I couldn't look myself in the mirror if I didn't do what I did, kind of that
Right.
moral obligation was very
Right.
unique. And so that moral obligation, that ethical sense, the steps I had already taken started to make more sense when I talked to Jackie. And these relationships are pivotal because she was able to introduce me to lawyers who were interested in taking my case. She was able to say, okay, you feel unsafe because the court published your address. So like, what are we going to do about this? And so very, very basic steps.
Mm-hmm.
So recognizing the safety concerns. And so I think this mentorship program Jackie has established is really lovely. And then we're going to back it up with some new trainings and a conference so that people feel empowered to be a mentor, know the scope of what they can do, and defer out when they can't. And so having a panel of people who are just as um, driven by the sense of protecting the community, your job really was to do. I don't even know if that made sense, but you know, it really effectuating your job and knowing somebody respects that,
Right.
and carrying it out. So I think that's what this peer support network really is about.
No, and I appreciate that. And I think you brought up a couple of words and ideas that Martina and I have talked about quite extensively too. This idea that we have this moral code and this moral compass. And we've looked at some of the research on the propensity to be a whistleblower and what inspires people to be a whistleblower. Martina, do you want to talk more about some of that research that we've been doing, and then the need to have a taxonomy and a lexicon for what are the domains of retaliation?
Sure. So Jackie and I did a little bit of research, mainly off of the Whistleblowers of America site. So there was a survey that whistleblowers that were using the site could choose to fill out. It was not obligatory in any way, but many women, many whistleblowers did, and I think that participating in the survey was helpful because it's a kind of informing. It's a kind of this alienation that Christian talked about is very real, and you do feel alone. And a lot of these tactics are designed to isolate you from your professional community, because the more isolated you are, and the more your sanity is questioned, and your validity is questioned, and these ethics maybe are implied to be overreaching. It's a way of discrediting you, and it's a way of getting people to look somewhere else, to look at you as even potentially a victim of your own making, so that they don't have to really look at these allegations that you're bringing forward. Because generally, a whistleblower is somebody that has been retaliated against, and there was a serious allegation that wasn't fully addressed. People that bring allegations and the allegations are fully addressed, they are whistleblowers, but I would consider them successful whistleblowers. So we never meet them. We're a panel of, I don't mean to be insulting, but not fully successful whistleblowers. And that's mainly because we whistleblowed against large problems. Our allegations were non-trivial. They were not easy to fix. And it was against leadership that were perpetuating these allegations, these crimes, if you will, to benefit. So that's why these retaliations happened, because leadership didn't want to stop what they were doing, and they don't want to be punished, and they don't want it to come out. So it's better to lose us than stop what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And the Whistleblowers of America survey brought out a lot of these tactics and sort of designed labels, if you will, so that they can be discussed more clearly. And these are not all encompassing. As we do more research, more things come up. They don't encompass a lot of the cyber issues that we're looking into, and whistleblowers are suffering there too. But they're mostly, it's basic. We're starting with basics, and I'm sure they'll get much more as we go along, unfortunately. So one of the first things that we talk about and that we question people about were whether or not they were gaslighted. And this is obviously when leadership, and sometimes even peers, start trying to convince the whistleblower, and unfortunately sometimes even friends and family members, start trying to convince the whistleblower for various reasons that what they're alleging and what they're seeing isn't quite true. That there might be other reasons for it. It might not be happening at all. They might be paranoid. Just a lot of different reasons why maybe that your peers and your family and your friends are frightened for you, but leadership is clearly trying to bring you around to their point of view. Your perspective is all wrong, and their perspective is all right. So it's just a ploy to sort of make this go away. But what it does is make you doubt yourself. And that's a slippery slope, because it's beginning to make you start doubting your own identity and question your own ethics. And that's where the injury first starts. Then we go on to more sort of what I consider amorphous and public tactics, which is things like being mobbing and shunning. So mobbing would be when it's an organized effort, like you go into a meeting and people start talking about this topic and it wasn't on the agenda necessarily, and they start telling you how wrong you are. It's kind of going from gaslighting, but now it's more public. Now you have a team of people against you. So it's not just one-on-one, now it's 5-on-1 or something like that. And this is also isolating, and you begin to question yourself further. Mm-hmm. And shunning is just what happens. You're walking down the hall and people that you know, that you always say hi, even in the elevator and stuff, now they can even like turn away from you. They don't see you anymore. Now you're invisible. And they'll talk to the people with you, but they simply won't acknowledge you in any way. It may not seem like such a big deal until it's happened to you. And then it becomes an identity crisis. You're like, well, I must be doing something terrible because I'm being punished. Clearly, these people don't even want to associate with me. And then there's marginalization. So you are physically removed from your space in many cases. You are taken out of a group office, put in an office out of the way. In my case, my space was closed down in the common area in the building, and I was going to be given space half an hour away.
Right, that's like what Ted said about having his computer shut off.
Yes, exactly.
That's marginalizing.
So any way to remove you from your regular peer support group, to isolate you as much as they can, and to discredit you at the same time. So then there are various other things. So you might have had great performance evaluations up until that point, and suddenly you don't know what you're doing anymore. All of your decisions are just not very competent. And sometimes this is written and sometimes it's not. But you just begin to become very inept at your job, even if you have years and years of history of doing it really well.
So Martina, let's put a pin in some of this because I want to pivot to some things that I've heard Aaron and Ted both talk about in terms of the alienation, the isolation, the loneliness, because I think these tactics have impact. And I want to focus a bit on the impact. So when you're a Marine or you're a police officer, those are very closed systems. And people are either going to love you or hate you. Aaron, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience as a police officer post whistleblowing and how people responded? In your case, it was very public. You didn't say that, but it was featured on the CBS Whistleblower series. Right. So what was that like?
It's and I believe there's a Netflix thing too in 2022. But yeah, it's I found that I'll make some generalizations, and I thought was just indicated as very true. I was actually writing things down because all those things happened to me, but everything from gaslighted to being moved, and on top of that being threatened, and so forth too. Well, we work in it, and Ted, we work with persons in the military and the police, and in the body armor industry, we often work with contractors also. And you can think what you want, but a lot of these contractors are linked to mercenary groups and so forth. So it was a very, very frightening frightening experience for me. And I went through all the things from, the case of gaslighting, mobbing, shunning, and so forth. So, and my computer was taken away from me. My phone was taken away from me. My office was closed off. It was rough. I was actually wearing a wire to work, with the Treasury. It's a very, very tough thing. we also work with a group, within a group of very conservative minded, I'm generalizing again, of persons that I always said that half of them think I think 90% don't even think about it at all. But but the person that do think about them, half of you think you're a villain. The other half are trying to figure out what happened. That includes my family and they don't get it. I spoke to my brother about this yesterday. He's a police officer, he just retired. And we talking about my son and talking about this very thing. He was a police officer now for 15 years. And he said, and my brother's real close to me. And I said, I don't think Aaron gets it. And his name is Aaron too. And he said, no, he doesn't. He said, I talked to me, he doesn't get what you've been through. He doesn't. He's a supporter of mine. But the thing of the matter is he really doesn't get it. And I said, my wife doesn't, I'm still married, which is amazing. And the thing of the matter is, I don't think they really get it. Loneliness is the biggest thing. You're out there alone, because even persons that are supportive, right? I found out later, my mother's passed away. She had a conversation with my youngest sister, so she's 10 years younger than me, that said, she said, how do you tell your son he's doing the right thing, but he's going to lose? And I don't think that he's, and it's been said that, my brains are, my guts, I'll use the word guts instead of something else, are bigger than my brains, that, yeah. So, but the thing is, and I even found out my mom's passed away. My mom had doubts, that was rough for me. And my sister said, yeah, she had doubts. And then you have dynamics within that family, my brothers and sisters, where they're maneuvering within the family, because I'm the oldest, and it's like, okay, he's lost his status because half the world thinks he's a putz, type of deal. And and it gets down to the personality type, and I'll be quiet because I know that Jacqueline. It's just, if you look at, and I think that Ted will understand this, and Jacqueline, I think you did mention too, that I'm Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman's book on combat. If you look in the back of it, I reviewed that book and on killing, and it gets back to some basic psychology and social psychology, is that certain people rush towards the problem. And I'll tell you, one of the greatest honors I had, just happened the other day, is I had a veteran, a Marine, that he passed away by himself, and I was at police scene, obviously, and I went to take the report. Family called, and he had a heart attack and he died. And I found him. I went to his house and I found him, and I called the veterans group, because I know they always help, because his family was far away. He had lived alone. He's a Vietnam veteran, lived alone for a long time. So I called the veterans group. I need some help. The family coming in, the funeral home and the whole thing. It's a little bit extra. And then I picked up, I said to the gentleman that answered the phone at the American Legion, I said, this is Aaron Westrick. And he goes, sheepdog. I go, what? He goes, we call you the sheepdog. And that's a reference not only to, but he says, you're always watching over people. Now my mind made me feel good. That was my nickname, sheepdog. But the idea is that he says, you watched over us. He gets it though. He's a local guy, and I've talked to him before. But a lot of soldiers and Marines, and I don't want to make us something. There's many support, and many have gone out of their way.
Yeah.
Be supportive of me.
No,
and maintain my security. So but you don't know the ones that don't. Because I went against their establishment. And once you stay with it, and it was like the whole idea. What don't you know better, that you just do what you're told, type of deal, And it came out. I'm lucky, and I don't know. And then I'll stop, Jacqueline. Is I don't know what would have happened if at the end of the day, my situation was successful.
Right. Yeah. So, and I think that's part of why I like I like having this network of people we feel connected to, because they understand what you're going through and they have your back. Mm-hmm. If I'm having a bad day, I know I can call any one of my compatriots here and just sort of vent out and problem solve. I mean, that's the whole idea of, I think, having peer support networks, is that you can talk through these things. You can identify with each other. Like when you said they call you sheepdog, I always say I feel like a giraffe, because we stick our big old necks out.
I like that one too.
So I think we have all these symbolisms and things that we relate to because the rest of the world, there's all this stigma against the whistleblowers, especially, calling them leakers and snitches. And I mean, I try to keep us away from using those words when we are dealing with whistleblowers because of the stigma. And I know, Ted, you and I have talked about some of the stigma and what it was like to be a vet center counselor, exposing the wrongdoing. And sometimes, I mean, patients were getting involved, veterans were getting involved, and then you live in a small town, and the retaliation and the actions taken against you. And you've also mentioned family. We've hit family a couple of times here, but I think the how you've had to cope with that, I think, has been an important part of your journey as well.
Yes, and Martina, you explained that so well. The way you articulated the tactics that are used and so on is it was just so well said. And I identified with everything you were saying there, personal to the things that were happening to me. And I too had been marginalized, shunned, mobbed, gaslighted in many different ways. Um, the police were going to be called if I ever went back to the vet center, even though I never did anything threatening, just on and on and on. And the more I got, success along the way with dealing with politicians in the national news media and having interviews and these things being broadcast, well, the stakes got higher. And, even to the point where they were trying to gaslight me and making it look like I had no idea what I was talking about and justifying what they were doing as the moral high ground. And the way they did it can be very convincing. And when you start second doubting yourself, just think what that does to the general public,
Mm-hmm.
and what other people's perspectives are going to be. It's really, really tough. And it's a very deep, dark, and lonely place. And when I first started out with this, filing all these complaints with federal agencies and such, and the retaliation that was ensuing, and the way they were isolating, distance me from the vet center and putting fear into my colleagues so they would not have anything to do with me, and even having a regional director go down, talking with everyone individually, convincing them it's all in Ted's head, he doesn't know what he's talking about, that kind of thing. It was so bad. I was so angry and depressed. I actually developed a pulmonary embolism that almost killed me because of clotting that I don't have any proclivity to based on blood work I had done. And I eventually, 3 months later, had to go on my own week-long therapeutic intensive just to kind of, deal with what I was going through emotionally and so on. It was really tough, and the impact on family. I wasn't available emotionally. Sometimes I wouldn't even go to family functions. If I did, once in a while, I'd go off and isolate, and, on and on and on. So it certainly, does have an impact. And, the things I learned with this, the importance of self-care, having done that therapeutic intensive, meeting Jackie and establishing a support network through Whistleblowers of America. And Jackie, I can't thank you enough for your moral and emotional support, as I was going through this, because, it's just not something you can do alone. No. So, you have to attend to your own self-care in ways that are meaningful to you. You have to have a support network built up as much as possible before stepping off and being the tip of the spear. And that's kind of where I made my big mistake. I kind of jumped real quick and got into this thing without really having solicited the kind of support I needed, either from organizations like Whistleblowers of America or even colleagues early on. Although fortunately, I had a couple of colleagues that have prepared interrogatories that are being used down the road because of legal action I've now had to take because of ongoing retaliation. I hadn't even been back to the vet center for 3.5 years. And a colleague dies who used to work there, and the obituary instructs drop off your memorial donation to the vet center. Just so happens my director was the point of contact on this. Hadn't talked to her in 3.5 years. She wasn't even there that day. I go down to drop off my memorial donation, and she has a no trespass order placed against me with no incident. And so I've had to hire a law firm not to only fight that because of not being given due process, but she ends up having filed a false police report. And, so there's things that just have to be rectified with that, because people in power just cannot go on with impunity and be allowed to get away with these kinds of things. So, I've decided that now this is another leg, I have to take legally in order to straighten that out and to ensure accountability of people that are perpetrating this kind of thing. And and I've already spoke about where things have gotten to with the legislation, which I feel is going to pass, and that's what this was all about to begin with. So for me, it's a victory no matter what happens with the rest of the stuff, because it is going to affect veterans, quality care, and those that care for them. So at least at the end of the day, I think that that's something I can feel good about, but it didn't make it any easier.
No, I thank you for sharing all of that, because I know what a difficult struggle some of that has been, especially when you feel like you've acted with honor and integrity, to have the very core thing that made you become a whistleblower in the first place questioned. I think is where a lot of the trauma, the identity disruption, where that all comes from. And I think, we only have a few more minutes, and I wanted to focus on the fact that when Martina was talking about those retaliatory tactics, they are traumatizing. They cause a moral injury. They can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, substance abuse, suicidal thinking. If you become unemployed, I've talked to many whistleblowers who have become homeless, who have gotten divorced. So kudos, Aaron and Ted, to your spouses, Martina, for getting through all of that. I know Christian and I have talked about what this has been like for her child. This is life altering and life changing. So I'm going to ask each of you to think of the one word you would say that has sort of sustained you and kept you going, and then we'll end the session, and hopefully we'll have provided some 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 guidance for other people coming our way. And for me, the one word that keeps me going is the idea that there's a connection here. So Christian, what would be your one word for hopeful for the future?
Oh, it sounds odd, but it would be my daughter's name. I think that I've done everything I've done in her honor and out of a sense of protection, because I lived in the same jurisdiction that I whistle blew on, and they had control over essentially parenting in my jurisdiction. So my word would be Ivana.
Ted, what's your one word?
Well, hard to put all in one word, but I'm going to have to say support and validation. As I had more success and started gaining more support, I started getting more validated, which kind of neutralized all the gaslighting and mobbing that was going on. And with the strong sense of justice that caused me to stay the course, all those things combined is what allowed me to be able to keep going.
Wonderful. Yes, I love that validation and that vindication idea. Aaron.
My first word that popped in my head was mission.
Mm.
But
Mission first.
That's no, but it's very loaded, because that's the way I'm mission based, raised in a Catholic Jesuit tradition, and I was with the idea of you do the right thing, and you do the right thing, and it's mission driven, that I go after certain things. That's why, Ted, I hit it off. The Marines that know me, a lot of my friends are Marines, and it's because the ones that obviously know the story, or they know me. They believe in me from the beginning because they know me. And
well, then semper fi to you, brother.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate that. And it's in police too. I see what I do. The joke is that I said is that I was supposed to be a priest, and then I met my wife in the last months of high school. But we didn't get married till later, obviously. But the thing is that and I'll talk to you later, Jacqueline. I even have my cousin, who is the oldest of 14 kids on my mother's side. He's the oldest son of the oldest daughter. I am the youngest son, youngest daughter. He is a whistleblower also. He is a highly decorated Vietnam veteran. He blew the whistle on some things that happened in Vietnam, and then he became a priest, and he blew the whistle on child abuse in abuse in Phoenix, Arizona.
Wow.
He's not, doesn't call himself a whistleblower. He calls
Yeah, it's hard.
yeah. No. Well, he moved on. He was a military chaplain, and he's still technically a priest, but he moved on and maintained us through the veterans, the military chaplain, and he was kicked out of pretty much the diocese of Phoenix, but he's still, and anyway, but the point of the matter is, I've talked to him about it. I'm writing a book too. And the thing is about the ethics, and I'm gonna call it the centurions, and what drives. And I'll give you a little background. I'm talking too much. I do that. There's
and we need to, because we have to keep with our time limit here. So I wanted to give Martina her one word.
Real thought, quick, Ted. There's 4 centurions mentioned in the Bible, and we don't know what happened to any of them.
So Martina, what is your closing word?
So my word would just be justice, because I think that it's a pretty simple concept here. If there hadn't been any of these injustices, we wouldn't have been retaliated against. We wouldn't have had to do what we had to do.
Thank you. So, and I think some of these issues that we've talked about today, about the psychosocial harm, the toxic tactics, the restorative justice, how we overcome these things, are areas I think are ripe for more research on understanding how these things are toxic, how this causes a moral injury, causes identity disruption, and then causes PTSD. And Ted mentioned stress-related disorders and other things that I've talked to many people about. Hopefully someday Whistleblowers of America will have a foundation and support so we can actually fund some of these studies. But for now, I appreciate everybody's time today, and I'm going to turn this back over to the National Whistleblower Center so that they can continue their meeting. Thank you for this opportunity to be part of this thing. And thank you to all the panelists for sharing so much.